More now on the Thomas Cook collapse and where it all went wrong from a business point of view. As we heard earlier in the program, China's Fosun Group was the biggest shareholder and is disappointed the rescue bid has failed. Fosun is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and began with an initial focus on investments in Chinese manufacturing and mining. It's since branched out to worldwide investments in property, healthcare and retail and entertainment sectors, among others. Fosun has extended its deeper sympathies to those affected by the collapse. What went wrong, though? Thomas Cook had announced last month that Fosun would inject $560 million into the business as part of an initial rescue package. Lenders were to inject another $560 million under the restructuring plan. But it was a last-minute demand by banks to raise a further $250 million in contingency funding. That sealed Thomas Cook's fate. The collapse of the 178-year-old travel firm has left 22,000 employees, 9,000 of whom are in Britain, out of a job. Thomas Cook has struggled against fierce online competition for some time. It also blamed Brexit uncertainty for a recent drop in holiday bookings. The group has also been blighted by enormous debt from its disastrous merger with Air Tour's owner MyTravel back in 2007. Hong Kong shares in Fosun Tourism and Fosun International plunged during trading today after news of the collapse was made public. Now, for more insight into the effects of the Thomas Cook collapse, we're joined by Nitin Pangarkar, Associate Professor of Strategy and Policy at NUS Business School here in Singapore. Firstly, how big is this collapse for sort of the bigger global tourism industry?
The global tourism industry is very large. So I think if you look at the whole global picture, it's a relatively small event. But on a focused basis, the impact would be much larger. For instance, in the UK, the impact would be larger, or some of the popular destinations that Thomas Cook was serving, the impact would be larger. But global tourism industry is huge, so I think it will adjust, but the focused impact would be more damaging.
And given that Thomas Cook is more focused on Europe and European travelers, does it affect Asian tourism too much?
Right. Right. So it affects European tourism, especially people flying out of UK and to some select to and from some select destinations. So it affects them a lot. It was also operating the airline, so wherever it was flying, those destinations will be affected because the airline service will cease in those locations. So there is definitely going to be focused pain in this adjustment.
China's Fosun Group is the company's biggest shareholder. Is there anything more it could have done or should have done to save the rescue deal?
It really depends. I think they were on the wrong side of a trend, and the trend is moving away from package tours to do-it-yourself, internet-based booking, which I think we all do. You know, when the demands are simple, that we have to fly somewhere and come back, stay in a hotel, we do it ourselves. It's only when the package tour is very complex, that's when the Thomas Cook types will come in. So the trend was against them. If I was Fosun, I would probably not put too much more money into it, for the simple reason that, you know, the technology is moving against them, the trend is moving against them. The consumers are showing a different kind of behavior. So I would say I would advise them not to put too much more money into that.
Well,
and they were also very right.
Carry on, Nitin.
Yeah, they were also very diffuse, right? They were not really very clearly focused. They ran airlines, they did this, they did that. So they went to a lot of different businesses, which makes it harder for them to turn around.
Well, this latest development has left a lot of travelers sort of in the lurch. Why couldn't Thomas Cook and its bosses have had a plan for an organized administration process that wouldn't have left all their customers in the lurch?
They should have had. I suspect that bank demand came in pretty suddenly. The banks demanded the money, the collateral pretty suddenly. That's my guess. But they should have anticipated it, and they should have made some arrangements for sure. That's what good management is about. And that's what averting a bad crisis is about. But clearly they failed in that. And the only possible reason could be that the banks made this demand suddenly. You know, that could be the only reason.
Well, as you sort of mentioned, Thomas Cook had been in trouble for some time, sort of going against where the trends were sort of headed. What, in your mind, are sort of the major factors then that contributed to the collapse in the end?
So they've been doing a lot of acquisitions for some time, and some of those acquisitions were funded by debt, and one of their partners went under, the German company that they merged with, that partner went under. So they took on a whole lot of debt. They got into airlines business, which is a pretty difficult business to run. So in your core business, the trend is against you. Then you get into a fairly difficult capital intensive business. You take on a whole lot of debt. So there are a lot of things happening around you, and that becomes rather difficult to handle. So they had a pretty large write-off, I think a year or two ago, of 1.5 billion pounds or somewhere around that. So that was writing off the goodwill that they had acquired during the acquisitions. So I think having a complex strategy that is difficult to execute when your own industry is difficult, that is very, very challenging. And I think that's where they failed. The management just couldn't grapple with the complexity that they had taken on.
All right, many lessons to be learnt from this. Thank you very much for helping us understand it as well. Nitin Pangarkar, Associate Professor of Strategy and Policy at NUS Business School here in Singapore.